Hey, and welcome to the Growing Leaders podcast. This podcast exists because the topic of next generation leaders is really important. So, Jamie, welcome back.
Thanks, Christine.
Since last time we were in a studio, you were out of town.
Yes, we were in Costa Rica, and now we're back.
Yeah, welcome back.
Thank you.
So today's conversation is really, really important. It's one that we have been planning for a little while,
Yes.
but it's really important to, I think, everyone who's listening, whether you're young or you're old. Can you tell us a little bit about what we're talking about today?
Yeah, and two pre-qualifiers before I say what I'm about to say, because the moment I say what I'm going to say, people are going to have a few different thoughts. But two pre-qualifiers. One, we're going to start a conversation that will probably take years to continue with different guests. So we're not going to try to hit it all today. And as I announce the topic, don't get scared. But number two, we're going to talk about something that has some negative connotations, but in a very hopeful way. So don't get scared. So the point we're talking about today is really to get into the topic of, we always are talking about finding next generation leaders, which, as we've talked about, young people care about and businesses care about. But one of the reasons we're talking about it these days is because churches really care about it, because they need to be caring about it, because so many churches across the United States, across the Western world, and really increasingly across the world are in danger of not existing in 5 or even 10 years, because many times they might have a building, they might have a bank account full of money, but they do not have another generation of leaders. And it's a really critical moment that is occurring in such a dramatic way that it's causing change. It's making people have to think about change. So have you seen any of this, Christine?
I have, yeah. And I think it's funny you started what you were just saying with finding next generation leaders, which is interesting because I think that's really not that hard to find. But I think because there's a lack of presence, we're like, oh, there aren't any, or we have to search for them. But it's really, I know the conversation will frame this later, but yeah, they've left the church or they're not around the church just because, there's 2 points to the conversation. One is because the church hasn't engaged them in a way that's really captured their hearts, or there's things in them that they're wrestling with, but it's for sure something that we've seen.
Yeah, so the statistics are what gets everybody down, but let's look at them real quick. So the percentage of Americans, Christine, who say they belong to a church or faith community is right now at an all-time low in the United States. So it's about 50%. And just to give you context, in 1937, it was 70%. But even the thing that's getting people really overwhelmed is that the last 20 years, it's accelerating the drop in a huge way. So that's one statistic. Next, if you go into a church these days, you're most often going to find older Americans, more so than young people. But you got to think about the context of that. Jesus starts with a group of young people. Younger people, their prefrontal cortex hasn't fully developed. They're prone towards dramatic passion. That's why most of the movements that occur in history have occurred with young people. So young people are made to be believers in something. So what that means is that they're just not coming into churches being the place that happens. And that's the first time that we're just seeing so few young people. And I'll have one more statistic and then I'd love to hear what you think about this. Nearly 2/3 of U.S. 18 to 29-year-olds who grew up in church tell Barna they've withdrawn from church involvement as an adult after having been active as a child or teen. And so that's what we call the dones. It's people who, hey, I've been there, done that, and I'm not coming back. And of course, what we know, Christine, is we know Jesus is the way, the truth, the life. He's electric. We know that when young people get a hold of Jesus, or when Jesus gets a hold of young people, they love him. They love him with their whole heart. So what you just said that's interesting is, yes, there are some things in young people today, and there's a lot of specific things about this generation just coming through the pandemic, all of the things that we can talk about growing up in a globalized, high technologically powered world. There's a lot in them. But there's also a bunch of things of the way that churches are engaging a younger generation right now that just aren't working. And why do you think?
We're going to just edit that out. Sorry, got stuck. I think there's a lot of things in what you just said. I think one of the biggest things that I've seen, and we talked about this actually a couple episodes to go with Brian Emmett, and Tim Keller touches on this too. But some of it is the assumption of evangelism, that just because someone's in the church, or because their parents were reached, or because we live in a Christian nation, quote unquote, then they must believe and they must be a part of this church. But we are in a post-Christian world and America, where once everyone was considered some form of a believer, but now that's not the case. And so the way we relate to young people and evangelize young people, or really anyone, needs to shift, because it's not, you can't assume that everyone will just come to your building because it's Sunday morning. Most people on Sunday mornings these days are found at downtown spot eating brunch. There are more people waiting in line for a brunch restaurant here in the city of Atlanta than there are people sitting in church. And so our reference for evangelism needs to change, because you can't just assume you have someone because they've shown up, but there's a part of capturing their heart that needs to happen in a way that draws them into an intimate relationship with Jesus, and they're life-changing because of that, not just because they were in our youth group or they were there growing up as a kid. It doesn't mean necessarily we captured them.
Yeah, so the great teacher Derek Prince used to say, you are a follower of Jesus if right now you were following Jesus. And it's really true. I remember even 10 years ago, you would come across churches where they were really angry with their young people. They were like, they're not doing this, and they're not doing that, and they're not doing this. I remember even one time I was called into a meeting in Costa Rica, and a great leader said to me, we're really concerned about our young people. They have long hair. They all have long hair, which Costa Rica has different. It's easy to hear that. And in the United States, we'd be like,
rebellion.
Yeah, it's just different down there. But the thing I said to him is the thing that you're touching on. I said, if we get their hearts, we'll get their hair. And, and honestly, some of those guys wish they still had long hair. They have no hair now. But what you're saying is right. As a church, just because they're born into your Sunday school, just because they're in your household, doesn't mean that Jesus has captured their hearts, that they've been regenerated and born again, that they're learning how to live by faith and to follow him. That's a separate piece. And it's happening when it's happening. And churches for a while have struggled. Mm-hmm. And let's be really honest, going back to the 80s, churches weren't doing great at reaching young people. And a lot of times our approach was games and fun and stuff like that honestly prepared them more for frat houses than for truly knowing him and spending time alone where he's moving in your heart. So we're in this moment where this hasn't been a strength, but what is really cool about this moment, and I'm excited about today's conversation, what's really cool about this moment is it's forcing change. This is a moment where it will have to change. You're about to say something?
Yeah, I think a part of the conversation, it struck me. It's the difference between meeting Jesus and knowing Jesus. Yeah. Because I can speak for myself. I met Jesus when I was young. I didn't really come to know Jesus till I was older. And I think that is a missing key in this conversation, or within the church and for young people. There are thousands of young people right now, hundreds of thousands of young people that have met Jesus, but they've not come to know him. And that is a big difference, I think, in them making the transition from childhood to adulthood and still being an active member of a faith community.
Yeah, and so I remember visiting your church and meeting you when you were a teenager, and I remember being a co-director of a camp that you were at and talking to you back then. And so you were worshiping, you were engaged in the things of God for sure. But then I remember meeting you around the time you were 18 and your life was sort of on fire, and you came and did an internship in Costa Rica, and you needed to be wrestled with. You needed to go through a different kind of experience to really, really sort things out and connect with him in a way that led to your faith as it is today. Is that a right cover of your entire spiritual life?
Yes. I think in the moments that you're talking about where you saw me engaging things at camp, I was trying to do what I knew to do to find him. But there were because I hadn't been wrestled with in that way that I needed, I didn't really know him. I was trying to come to know him, but there were these divides in my understanding of where I was and where he was and what I needed and what he was offering.
Yeah, and so that's a great segue to what we're talking about today. We're going to talk about why post-college believers. So these are kids that are coming out of campus ministries and who have really known him in college, why they are really struggling to settle into churches or just aren't settling into churches. And we're going to invite our good friends Joey and Molly Johnson when we pop back.
Welcome back, everyone.
Thanks.
So we mentioned this.
Wait. Who are you welcoming back? Because I'm back now. Are you welcoming everybody who's listening? Are you welcoming Molly and Joey? Because this is their second time on the podcast.
Welcome, everyone.
Okay.
So Joey, Molly, Jamie, Rocky, and Micah here in the studio. Whoever is listening to this, welcome. We love you. Thanks for listening to our voices.
Wow.
So welcome back. We do have Joey and Molly. We mentioned this earlier. But today's conversation, we've already kind of highlighted, but we're talking about why post-college believers aren't settling into churches.
Yeah, that's right. But first, let's go ahead and acknowledge something that's happening for the first time today ever in the history of this podcast. There are more Johnsons here on the show right now than there are Emmets. And so it's time for us to vote some things and some changes around here.
The very first episode had more Johnsons than Emmets.
Okay, that's right. Well, in the bed a few weeks ago with Brian Emmet,
yes,
we had, so you guys had us beat. All right, you're right. We should get on to this. So what's great about having Joey and Molly with us today, Joey and Molly Johnson, you guys are on staff with Boy with a Ball, which is wonderful. You guys are youth pastors at Covenant Life Church in Lawrenceville, Georgia. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Check. But a really cool part of your story is the way you guys met and then ended up in ministry at the University of Georgia. And so could you guys just tell a little bit about your story of kind of coming together and then ending up being involved with Cru there at University of Georgia?
Yeah, I can start this one, and happy to be back on the pod.
Welcome back.
I can start. Yeah, recurring cast. So the way that we first I went to University of Georgia, and Molly transferred there in the in the spring of 2018. Is that correct? In the spring of 2018, and I, on my very first day of being at the University of Georgia, went outside. There were some basketball courts. I saw a tall, bald man named Pat Mangan playing pickup basketball. And he said, hey, I'm part of this thing called Cru. And I had actually, at that point, I knew Cru was a thing because Christine's husband, Peter, had told me that he was a big Cru guy at Harvard. And so I respected Pete a good deal. So I decided I would go and give them a try. Really enjoyed that they were playing basketball. So I thought there was some good overlap in that. And then ended up at Cru, which was on the University of Georgia's campus, probably the second biggest campus ministry. There was Wesley, which gathered about 1,500 of the 30,000 students of University of Georgia every Wednesday, and had a little bit more of the big mega church kind of smoke machine, big worship production feel. But then Cru was a little bit more within my speed of, it was probably 200 to 300 people. It was acoustic worship. It was really focused on small groups that happened within the dorms. And I got really instantly plugged in with a good friendship of mine, Oren Swayze, who started to disciple me very early on. And we would go and get coffee at Hendershots. And we would go and talk about Kishibashi music. And it was great. I had a strong relationship with him. And then the nature of Cru is that they quickly start to promote you. If you're within it at all, you go into their retreats and they start to identify, hey, these freshmen seem like they're more mature. Let's start talking to them about then leading small groups of their own. And so you get a cascading leadership model of where seniors are leading junior small groups and juniors are leading sophomore small groups and sophomores are leading freshman small groups. And within it, there's a strong amount of placement for your own personal relationship. So Cru was really crucial for me as in my formation of faith, especially as I was meeting Jesus. Molly, when Molly first came to University of Georgia, I remember saying, hey, I go to this thing on Tuesday nights, and I remember Molly coming and sitting next to me at it, but I don't know what thoughts did you have on it as you came in?
I think we both, Joey and I, had pretty significant faith experiences in college, where we really encountered Jesus, and we really encountered the power of the Lord. And so, and we were in school. So as I transferred, I went with Joey because I didn't know a lot of people at UGA. I went with Joey to Crew. And then very quickly so that was the spring of 2018. So then in the fall of 2018, they asked us if we would both lead small groups, me a freshman small group and Joey a sophomore guys small group.
Yeah. So what's interesting about all this, and Christine, you kind of were witnessing them while they were in this process. You guys were growing in faith. You were growing in kind of getting to be a part of reaching others around you. And there were some really cool dynamics you had, including Molly was staying in this barn where young people could kind of gather, and there, all the cool stuff that happens in a college town. You're meeting at coffee houses, you're hanging out, you're meeting in people's dorms. There's one crazy story, Joey, where your small group, weren't you guys out on a baseball field or something swinging? What was that?
So I led a group of sophomore guys, and it was a group that had existed prior to me. I was a junior. And so they had a strong identity. I hadn't been part of leading it before. So me and one of my best friends, Chase Cooper, decided that we needed to do something before we were going to launch into getting to know these guys at a really intimate spiritual level. We wanted to do something that would be fun action together. Guys bond through adventure. And so it's a really cheap hobby. And if you're vegan or at all animal friendly, this is a horrifying story. But we went and spent $3 to get 60 eggs and just went to batting cages and pitched the eggs at each other and let people take baseball swings at it. And it was as satisfying as you would hope. And it was, we were the first week, we were about 8 guys. And then by the end of the semester, we were around 20 to 25 guys. Yeah, it's a great group. We all still message each other and see each other.
Yeah, so it's the way I made you tell that story will belie what we're heading into next. But by all accounts, it was pretty real what was occurring with you guys. People were truly having encounters with Jesus, with his presence, with his power. And it was really making a big difference in their lives. And people were coming into a faith that involved discipleship, community, being pretty true to set out moments of kind of coming together, all the typical things you think of when you think of connecting with Jesus in a church. All those things were happening for you guys. Is that right? Would you say that it was what was happening there for you guys in that moment and for those students was really authentic?
I would say so. I think there are moments like Joey's where it's like guys having fun, which are important and critical for relationship and growing together. And then were also stories of people meeting Jesus in the student center and going through deliverance and experiencing the power of the Holy Spirit. And there were lots of substantive conversations and then fruit about purpose and hearing God's voice. And even to this day, there are still relationships that were formed in that time. There are still significant relationships in both of our lives that come from that time that if it was just all fun, college fun, we would have faded away from each other. But because the Lord did something for us in that time, we still get to be in deep relationship with those people. So I would definitely say for me, and then I would think and hope that the people who were also in that ministry with us and in that time would say it was very substantive.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's such a vibrancy to the village that a college town creates, and that you're living your life in some ways because of the cruise ship experience that going to colleges. You can get into some very low stakes Acts 2:42 living. of that you are constantly with each other. You take quick forays out into your college class, but then you retreat back to the dining hall to talk about what's going on. I remember being in the corner of Bolton and praying for one of my guys to be filled with the Holy Spirit as he started to speak in tongues. And at the same time, then you're like, you see 2 tables over, there's just like a bunch of like frat guys. It's there was a vibrancy to what was happening in our life, which really, for us, we were just actually, it wasn't long after we were meeting Jesus ourselves that probably we started to see this stuff then happen for us as we went back to college, which for us, there was a big fear of, we met Jesus over the summer in suburban Georgia. And so then as we went back to college, would we be alone, or would there be a sense of the lack of support that we needed? And then quickly we started to see God's miraculous power move into small groups and with our friends. For us, it was affirming. It made us feel like what had happened in us in that summer was real. But more than that, it was that he was using us in some way, and we got to participate in it.
Yeah, one last thing that's a key ingredient, because you're with Cru, which Dr. Bill Bright founded back at UCLA, I guess in the 60s or 50s. It also had a strong biblical foundation to it. So it wasn't just a bunch of students talking about their feelings, or there were real foundations to what was happening. So that's fascinating. So I think we're going to turn into the topic today to say that now, as you've got out, and I'll turn to Christine to kind of position this, but now as these guys have gotten out, they've had a situation, Christine, where so many of these very dynamic believers, these dynamic relationships, they're holding, but they're witnessing something happening as those guys are transitioning from that college experience into trying to find their places in churches. So I'll let you guide that next part.
Yeah, I think what you're explaining is really what you were just talking about was really compelling. Like, there's no question that your friends had an encounter with Jesus, and something we were speaking about earlier in the episode was the difference between meeting Jesus and then really knowing Jesus. And so I would love to hear a little bit about, like, so you have some stories, and you were even mentioning some of that about like the guy getting full of the Holy Spirit. So like there were people encountered Jesus, but what do you think's happened now or happening now that's created this divide where all of these young people were a part of a really dynamic, life-giving, encountering the Holy Spirit small group and campus ministry, but now aren't integrating into local church? What do you think's happening there? Or what are you seeing?
I have my thoughts, but do you want to take a first stab?
Yeah, I think it's probably something more that we wrestle with than I feel like I have conclusive evidence in, because it's so much. We graduated college 3 years ago now, and we left Athens 3 years ago, and many of our friends have since, and so yeah, like Christine said, it's been interesting to watch where it was. I don't doubt that it was real. Their faith encounters, we were living those things out together. But then in the years that have happened since, there's been less and less of them that choose to keep going. And they don't find local churches. They don't continue to find a community. They get jobs and kind of become quiet is how it feels. And so I think some of the things that I've seen is that, yes, there was definitely, there was some ability to hide in the midst of COVID, which is like when COVID happened and everything shut down, it gave everyone permission to retreat. Because I do think plugging into a community, going out and finding a community is hard. It's uncomfortable. You don't fit in. It's not fluid. And some of the things that happen in college, like some of college is that it's supposed to be this great fun experience. And so there are things more set up for you than necessarily the processes right now of go out and find a local church to be a part of. So I think there's that piece for sure. I do think also we've been in dinner with friends or things like that where they've talked about the being plugged in or having to commit to a local church or like a community, it feels like limiting to them, where it's where they would be giving up some of their own freedoms or their own, like, I'm not sure exactly, giving up part of their ability to run their life and to set up their life to plug in, because you do have to do all the things, which is like, you have to go into a local church and be uncomfortable. You have to meet people. You have to start small. You have to be humble. And especially in a situation where you, and maybe in college, were promoted as a leader rather quickly, that's not necessarily the reality in like kingdom structures outside of college. Some of it is because you are dealing with multiple generations. And we've watched where our friends are not always attracted to multi-generational dynamics as much as they're attracted to being around people that are just the same age as them, just the same life stage as them, which for us is sad, because we've seen the fruit of being in multi-generational places where generations of people who walk in faith and know the Lord add to each other and build a strong community and build safe places where people can grow in the Lord. And we've seen that coming in small, being a part of that, being alongside those leaders is way better for us. But we've also seen I feel like I watch a resistance to that as our friends have graduated college. But
I also think it's where the engineering model for faith growth is very clear within a college ministry mindset of you're born into the church that your parents bring you into. You go there all the years. You get involved with your whatever school you're at. You get involved with the FCA at that one. Whatever church you're at, you get involved with the youth group that you're at. Then you go to college, and there's some choices you can make of which campus ministry, but they're all probably within a quarter mile from each other. And so the question is not about whether you're going to participate in one, but is it going to be acoustic worship? Is it going to be electric worship? Is it going to be large groups or small groups? Will it be about scripture memorization, or will it be about cold call evangelism? You pick what you want within your campus ministry. And then there's the friend group dynamics of, you can be a fraternity person, a sorority person, you can be somebody who's really into the active indie music scene. You find your group really clearly, and then all of a sudden and you go from the model that I said of, you're a freshman, then you're a sophomore leading freshman, then you're a junior leading sophomores, then you're a senior, and then all of a sudden you're out, and there are so many options in a way that it's not clear. And then I think there's also just the attractiveness that comes within that model of, you are able to live your life so closely together that then as you go out and you're having to go into your workplace throughout the week, but then you're supposed to find spiritual significance within a community where you are meeting on Sunday, and then if at best at a small group in the middle of the week, and you're getting 2 touches a week versus every day together all the time. And so no matter what happens then is, unless you're seeing something in faith, the church experience when you graduate from college feels disappointing, or feels disorienting, or feels lonely. And it creates a little bit of the Christian version of the college days were the best days of my life. I had a friend who was moving to grad school, and I was asking if he was excited, and he said, well, I know that it's not going to be like what it was in Athens. And I had to mess with him and say, do you feel like the Lord has called you to where you're going? And he said, yeah. And I said, then it's going to be better. I said, it's going to be exactly what he's called you to do in that moment. I said, some of it is then also where we get attached to the way things happen in a very clear manner. You have to think about the church in Acts, that then it took persecution for them to get scattered. But you see also a lot of where people are so built into something so vibrant that happened and so live that happened in their college ministry life, that then all their weekends are spent driving 3 hours to Valdosta, or driving 2 hours to Augusta, or driving whatever amount to spend time with those same groups there, rather than building roots within the community they're at. And they're functioning within a nomadic church of what has happened versus what it could happen.
I want to say a quick comment and then just toss it to you for you to kind of ask your next question, Christine. But one very cool piece that you guys are creating for us, I always talk about when I was a kid, we went down into the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of California, excuse me. And we would go to these beaches in Mexico that were beautiful. But if you got in an inner tube and you went out on the water, if you looked down into the inner tube, it calmed the water so clearly that you could just see everything. And what y'all's situation creates for us is we can read through the statistics and they're harrowing at this point as far as what's happening for the generation that you're touching and that you're describing about what's happening to them. So we can touch them as statistics and in Barna publishing pieces. But what you guys are doing is being able to just to kind of give live data and context and anecdotes about what's happening to friends that you're walking with. And I would think that's a resource for us, not just for today's conversation, but on an ongoing basis, being able to check in. It's a really beautiful way to humanize the conversation. That's a very critical one. So, all right, next question, Christy.
Well, I have a few. And so I think I'll give you two and you can each choose how you answer it because they go hand in hand. But one is you both led small groups. And I know several of the people from your small groups because you were bringing them around to different things. But what would you, so the first question is, and you can choose who answers it. What do you think made the biggest difference in helping bridge the transition? Because you had some people in your groups that have made the transition successfully from college ministry to local church and are doing well. They're pursuing discipleship, they're learning, they're growing. Their encounter with Jesus grew to a point where they really knew him and have settled in somewhere. And then you have some people in your small groups that have bounced the way we've been saying. They haven't been able to settle into a local church. So that's the first question. The second question, the other one can answer this, is what would help? Like, what would help a young person who may be listening to this that is trying to figure out then how do they land into a local church or how do they settle in? They're about to graduate, or what can a church do that would help?
Including things you've seen actually happen with some of your friends.
Which one do you want to do?
I definitely have an answer for the second one, but I can answer the first one as well. Here, you take the first one. I'll take the second one.
Okay, so the first one is what's the difference between some who have made the it's a good question. I only have anecdotal evidence. I think I have watched, I think this may be something that's true about our generation, more as a whole, is I think that there's a sense of like, that you should live a really big, adventurous, film-worthy life. And I actually think that's, if when you follow the Lord, that's true, and he does lead you into like these miraculous, crazy things. But I think there's kind of sometimes a sense that you can like produce your life or produce your life. And so I was actually thinking when Joey was talking, for some, it feels like there's a choice, and I even wrestle with this, like I've even wrestled through these things and still do, of like adventure chasing versus like chasing the Lord and going after the things that, because he takes things really different than I've ever expected every single time. And it's not something like you can't produce the Lord and you can't like direct him. And so I think one big piece is like, do you have faith for that? I think we've been challenged, like as we were leaving college and figuring out our next steps and things like that. Like, do you have faith that what the Lord has for, do we have faith that what the Lord has for us is good, and is real? And I think it's a question we have to keep revisiting. But I think if there's any piece where you're wanting to produce a certain kind of life or create a certain kind of look or way it's going to go, you don't get to hold on to those things. And I've watched friends make the decisions both ways, where they had faith for it or not. And I think it's not just something you have to choose once getting out of college. I think it's something you have to choose a lot as you keep going. I do also think that, if I think about my small group, there were for some people, there was it's like wanting to want spirit, like things of the Lord, where they were around it, but not actually engaging it, where it was substantive in their own life. But then the group that I've seen make the transition from college ministry into churches, is that the real things did happen for them. So it wasn't just that they wanted to go to a college ministry because it fit part of their personal brand or how they wanted to carry themselves in college, but they did meet Jesus. They were filled with the Spirit. They experienced his deliverance and his freedom. They heard his voice. And those things, I think, those things are real. And so once you've tasted them and known them, I think they're harder to walk away from. And I've even watched a loop for some where real things happened. They wrestled over it, and I didn't see them for a little while. But now some of those friends are back in our life, where the Lord has continued doing what he did back in college.
Just to answer that question as well, I would want to say the answer, it's those who really pursued discipleship, but that's actually an inordinate way of saying that. It's really those who really developed a capacity to hear God's voice or want to hear God's voice, that have really stuck with it. Those who are led by themselves typically then find themselves a little bit in isolation a little bit more. But I think the reason I would say the discipleship piece is that often then helps hone in on what God's saying, and having somebody who's alongside you helping find God's will in your life. That is really crucial. And we have found those individuals. There's guys in my small group who did experience something very real, but they never totally have found the ability to come strongly into a discipleship manner. And so then even though something very real happened, and of course we trust the seed of what happened in their lives and the story's not done, you watch them right now where they're looking for what the next step is. Regarding what can happen and how they can plug in, I would start by saying something to the church, which is, it's what Molly said. Our generation, which I always claim I'm the first Gen Zer ever. If you were born before me, you are a millennial. And if you're born after me, you're a Gen Zer. But for Gen Z, there's a desire to be your brand, or to live your brand, or live the lifestyle of it. It's where you're not just, you're constantly advocating for what you believe, or who you are. And the way that you choose to identify yourself isn't just, it's not just, I like fishing, but I'm going to wear the fishing clothes, and I'm going to advocate and share things on my Instagram that are about river conservation. And so all these different manners of what happens there leads to then when they show up to a church, which is just a once a week thing, it's not the lifestyle that they're wanting. It's not enough of a full lifestyle experience for them for it then to be something that would really grab their hearts. And so what I come out of it thinking is some of what made Crew so appealing was there was Friday Frisbee, there was Wednesday sharing days, there was Thursday prayer, there was Tuesday was Cruise Day. On Sunday, a good amount of people went to the same church. There was such a sense of what was happening that it will mean that some of the church has to be somewhat open to how is it not just about a meeting, but how is it pouring out of the meetings into vibrant life on life experience, both missionally. I think our generation isn't one that is freaked out by the idea of advocating for a mission, where I think sometimes older generations have felt that. Our generation is really excited to do things like share, or to be part of evangelism, or be part of more histrionic versions of kind of worship. Like that is something that we're our generation isn't as nervous about. But then if it comes down to just being at a Sunday meeting and that's it, it won't engage it enough. So what does it look like to have vibrant small groups, to go into it very fully with a sense of what's the missional side of what the church is doing beyond just is the worship and the speaking good on Sunday? For a young person, I would say there is some level of you're just going to have to pick and commit and fight for a group of people and have faith that the Lord has called you to that place. The ultimate thing you can do is seek God's voice. Is he calling you to that place? And how do you commit and fight for it in every way possible? Go to lunches every week. Figure out what's happening. Who's the church pastor, and go meet with them. If they have membership courses, be part of it. Involve yourself with a small group. Involve yourself with the youth ministry. Find ways to then to build the experience until the point where you do feel deeply woven into the church experience there.
I noticed really clearly in your list, you didn't mention anything about churches doing very intentional tickling.
That would be an experience.
I also noticed you neglected to bring up the very powerful new program of horse dancing.
Which Jamie is best at.
And it's so hard to hold the hoofs of the horse while you keep him looking you in the eyes.
Oh, we're dancing with the horses. Okay.
You misunderstood. Well, so what this brings up is like when you prick y'all's finger, or which shouldn't do, it hurts. When you do anything with you guys or slice off any part of you, which would be painful, what comes out is like a lot of content about everything that's happening with this group and with this generation. And so I think it's wonderful, and being able to facilitate this being an ongoing conversation is a really good idea. But for the sake of time, we have to cut this off right now. So what I'm going to say is you each get to say, if you were talking to somebody who is a leader within a church and you could give them one piece of advice to be able to connect with one of your friends, to have a chance of them like sticking and finding a meaningful place, each one of you gets to answer this question. What would be your one piece of advice?
That's a good question. My one piece of advice, and based off how I've had 5 seconds to think about it, I'll probably have more
You're stalling.
But my one piece of advice would be invite the young couple, or invite the young person that's coming in into your life. Bring them to your family's lunch. Bring them to dinner at your house. Let them be part of the tucking your kids into bed, or playing basketball with your sons, or whatever it is that you do. Invite them into your life. They're living life out of appointments or a scarcity of time is something that older people do. Young people still have a lot of time. If they're new to your community, that means they don't have a lot of friends, so their time is plentiful. So they're happy to spend a 4-hour slot just at your house. And as much as that seems unstructured, that's exactly what they would want.
Mine is not too terribly different. I think it's very possible to be seen in our generation. Like, some of it is, we all have 1,000 profiles in 1,000 places, so it's very possible to be seen. I think even for me, I can be around people a lot and not feel known. And so I think the going out of seeing like, oh, a new young person is here in front of me, to fighting to know them really well. I think that would make a big difference for a lot of our friends, because I think for a group who is so widely seen, I would say very few of our group feels deeply known. And so I think it feels most of the time like it's a lonely setup once you get out of college, out of that. And so that's what I would say.
Wonderful answers they gave there, Christine. But did you notice there was no horse dancing?
I did, which was a little disappointing.
A little bit disappointing. Well, great to have these guys.
It was great.
Would you allow them to come back?
I would, but the prerequisite would be at least one horse dance.
Happy to.
We'll see.
I knew one of you would take me up on the offer and the other wouldn't, and it's about where I expected.
She can be a naysayer.
All right. Thanks,
That's
guys.
a wrap.
That was great.
That was really, really fun. And the whole horse dancing thing threw me, but I loved it. And so what were some of your big takeaways as you listened to Joey and Molly Johnson talk about why post-college believers aren't settling into churches?
I have so many. I took a lot of notes. But I think what's interesting is one of the things that was highlighted for me is in college, whether it's college ministry or just college life, it's really easy to belong and to join a group. And there's a clear growth model. So like you could join a college ministry and then next year you could be leading something, which is really attractive, especially for a group that's after some adventure and having to wrestle and find some things. That's not always the case within a local church. And so what brought up for me is when there's a group that's chasing adventure, are we living an attractive gospel that's drawing them into a real adventure? Or are we saying our gospel and living a life of faith is actually really boring and then they're choosing other things? I think some of it's how it's even, which goes back to the evangelism question we were talking about earlier. Like, what are we evangelizing people into? Is it attractive? Is the way that we're living our lives and our relationship with Jesus being lived out in a way that's attractive to others or not?
Yeah. And so first piece to all that, to living an attractive gospel, is faith. Like if you're struggling, and what's happening so much today is people are getting negative or cynical, or they're starting to act as if Jesus isn't sovereign, and as if his word's not true, that he who began a good work in us will be faithful to complete it. So they start living out of fear or anger or frustration, and going all the way back to having Brian Emmet. That's just not a great way to reach anybody. So you can't do that when that's happening. But if you're full of faith, and if you believe God's on your side and he's with you, then the big thing is to hear in what Joey and Molly are saying, what you're saying, is that this is a whole group of people that are there for the taking. Mm-hmm. And they're not nearly as far away as you think. But the interesting piece is they don't want less of you.
They want more.
They want more. And it doesn't have to be the senior pastor. It really can be that there's a group of believers or leaders that you say, hey, keep your eyes open every Sunday. And if you see somebody, go to lunch that week with them. So I really like how easy all that is. I have a big bonus point here. I think it's my grand solution to all things that I want to hide in this second half of this podcast, but I think we'll end up mentioning it again and again, which is what we're finding across history, that we get this from the model Jesus used, is when it is about in your church faith formation, and that's for many churches, they're thinking about faith formation. But then when it for sure also involves discipleship, and then the third piece being it involves launching people into ministry, when it involves those three and intentional time seeking younger people, you'll win. And if you think about Jesus, he did all three, but most of our churches would say we're helping form faith, though if you're never pulling people out into action, into outreach, then it's the faith to come every week. And I'm not so sure we're touching every aspect of faith that Jesus did when he said, walk on water, or, go out and find a man of peace in a village. So faith formation, first of all, are we really doing that in a dynamic and authentic way? Number two, discipleship. And we all have programs that are like 4-week programs or this book or that book. But if you haven't got a hold of what discipleship is, often these college ministries have figured it out, whether it's navigators or crew or InterVarsity. Those groups have been so intentional about discipleship, and then these kids are coming into your group and you're not that clear. You're going to get hurt there. But then the third piece that Jesus did so well, he takes the guys out and they follow him out into ministry, is if church doesn't sooner or later become about how I can grow in yielding my life to the Holy Spirit and taking up my cross, denying myself and following him out into seeking and saving the lost, out into setting the captives free. If it doesn't get to that, then it really doesn't get to the depths of a heart of a young person. So those are our biggies. Those are to us like the pieces that are real answers. So what are you thinking?
No, I think that's really, really right. I think what everything you just said, what it highlights for me, and it echoes what they were saying, is in all of that, whether it's faith formation or discipleship or inviting people into ministry, it requires a going with,
yes,
versus just talking to and saying, "Oh, go do this," or just a preaching, which has been the more traditional model of church, yes, where it is a Sunday gathering or even a small group gathering, but it's a lot less of the going with and the walking with and the spending time with. And so I think that the withness is a key.
Yeah, so that's a great beginning to one of the key conversations for everyone's future. So that was great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think if you're listening to this, be sure to, if this is your first time tuning in, be sure to tune in to any previous episodes. Some great ones is the first one with Joey and Molly about their youth group and the kind of youth group they're leading, if you want to hear our first conversation with them. But also one of our 2 episodes ago, we had a conversation with Brian Emmet that echoed a lot of this too, about post-Christian America.